Chapter 9. Miguel was an ancient Mexican with a withered and seamed countenance. His tall frame was shrunken and cadaverous, and his wispy hair showed silvery white when he lifted a shapeless felt hat to greet Dusty politely. He showed some yellow snags of teeth and a wide smile, and his black eyes gleamed with curiosity as they lingered on Dusty's costume and on the gun belt slanting across his hips. He went to the head of the team and caught them by the bridles when Dusty pulled them up in front of the big barn. When Dusty dropped the lines and stepped down, he asked,
"You are the new patron, senor?"
Dusty replied, "Sort of, yeah. That is, I plan on taking hold here, but I ain't the man Miss Katy was looking for."
"No, senor?"
"He didn't come. He got killed on the Marfa stage." The old Mexican nodded and replied,
"So, you'll work here still, though?"
"Call me Dusty."
"Bueno. I'm Miguel, Senor Dusty."
Dusty nodded and held out his hand. The Mexican shook hands with him gravely and replaced his hat on his head.
"I'm glad you've come, senor. The Katy, she needs a man badly."
"Are you the only one left, Miguel?"
"Si, my Mademoiselle Juanita, she is the cook for Miss Katy, and I tend the barn. I'm too old for riding much no more."
He shook his head sadly and went around to unhook the traces. Dusty stayed at the head of the palominos and held them until the traces were unfastened from the doubletree, and then led them a step forward and let the tongue out of the neck yoke, dropping it to the ground. Miguel hurried around to help him unhook the neck yoke, protesting,
"I'll fix the team, senor. It's not up to you."
"I want to get the lowdown on some things." Dusty walked beside him as he led the team into the cool barn. He busied himself helping unharness while he pried the old man with questions. "You been here a long time, Miguel?"
"Si, a long time. Since Senor Rollins built his house."
"How many riders did he have on the payroll?"
3 men. She was steady work. In roundup there was more, 10, maybe 12.
"And he didn't have any trouble with rustlers then?"
"No, senor, he had no trouble."
"Why do you reckon it started right after he died?" The old man shrugged his stooped shoulders.
"Miss Katy, she told the man they cannot wear guns. Across border are many bad hombres afraid of her stealing, while Senor Rollins is here. After he died, they's be no more afraid. Find out quick that Katy riders no more got guns."
He spread out gnarled hands expressively.
"It's much bad now."
"But she tells me that Lon Boxley's been sending his XL riders over to help out." A shadow crossed the Mexican's face.
"They come sometimes,"
he admitted stiffly. They had the harness off the palominos and hung up on the wooden pegs in the wall. He stripped the bridles off and stepped aside to let the horses trot past him through the barn and out the back door to the feeding pen. "But they don't do much good, huh?" Dusty drawled.
"I think, senor, that they don't want to do no good. I think maybe they make what you call the pretend for try."
Dusty nodded, mused. "Pulled the wool over her eyes so she wouldn't hire no real gun hands while the rustling goes on till she gets plumb desperate, huh?" He drew in a deep breath. "I reckon it's in the cards for me to have a talk with that Mr. Boxley."
"He's a bad man with guns, Senor Dusty."
"Fast, huh?"
"Si, mucho pronto. He's killed much hombres."
The gentle ring of a bell drifted down to them from the house.
"That's we need, for the dinner's ready,"
Miguel told him. "Yeah," Dusty said. He started away and hesitated and turned back. "Is there an extra rig here I can borrow?"
"A saddle? Only the one of Senor Rollins."
"I'll use it," Dusty told him. "Give me a good horse for after dinner." He turned and went out of the barn and up the shaded path between the double rows of poplars towards the house. He hesitated at the path leading up to the front door and circled around to the rear instead. Beside the kitchen door he found a bucket of fresh water set out on a long bench beside a washpan with a clean towel hanging from a nail above it. He filled the pan and stripped off Ben Thurston's striped shirt, dousing his arms and head in the water, and went to work with a bar of yellow soap. After sloshing a great deal of water about, he dried himself with the towel and picked up the shirt again. He stared at it with loathing, wishing he didn't have to put it on again when he heard the kitchen door. He turned and blushed a deep scarlet when he saw Katy coming towards him. She smiled at his discomfort and told him,
"I've seen men in their undershirts before. The hen's always lined up here to wash before supper. Here."
She offered him a little gray bundle of cotton cloth.
"It's one of Dad's old shirts. I saw you looking at that one as though you were afraid it would bite you," she went on quickly.
Dusty dropped the striped shirt and took the one she offered him. "A man gets sick of wearing a thing like that in a hurry," he admitted. "Sure is nice of you to get one out for me."
"You won't be quite so conspicuous." Katy turned. "Come in as soon as you're ready. Juana has the dinner on the table."
Dusty slid his arms into the sleeves and pulled the shirt over his head. It was a little large for him, but felt mighty good after the constraining tightness of that gaudy thing he had just discarded. Juana was a fat, beaming Mexican woman, not more than half her husband's age. She opened the kitchen door for Dusty and led him down a short hall to a large room next to the kitchen. There was a small table set for two under the wide windows at the end of the room. The table was covered with a gay red and white cloth, and there was a bowl of yellow daisies in the center. Katy Rollins smiled at him from one of the two chairs and said,
"Juana will be angry if you don't sit down and eat while everything's hot."
Dusty went across the room awkwardly and pulled out the chair opposite the mistress of the KT Ranch. "I wasn't expecting nothing like this. I'm more used to squatting on my heels and eating out of a tin plate."
Katy replied, "It gets terribly lonesome. We all used to eat together, Dad, I, and the men."
She put a large steak on his plate and pushed a bowl of mashed potatoes closer, urging him,
"Take plenty of everything. Juana always cooks enough for a dozen range hands."
There was creamed gravy and boiled carrots, fluffy biscuits, and a large platter of yellow butter. When he began eating, Dusty was glad there was plenty of everything. He remembered that he hadn't eaten any supper in Marfa the night before. He had been too busy drinking and making a play for Rosa. The recollection shamed him, and he kept his head down and devoted his attention entirely to the job of his stomach. When he had gotten down to biscuits and honey, along with his third cup of coffee, he began to slow up, and he apologized to his hostess. "I reckon I've kind of been eating like a wolf, ma'am, but I missed a few meals, and your cook sure can make everything taste pretty darn good."
"I like to see a man who enjoys his food," Katy told him simply.
She leaned her elbows on the table and cupped her chin in her hands.
"And I want to thank you for the way you offered your help to me this morning, even though I can't accept your offer."
She paused to draw in a long breath.
"I know when I'm licked. I'm going to be selling the KT.
Made up your mind kind of sudden, ain't you? Dusty set his empty coffee cup down and leaned back to roll a cigarette.
It's a decision I've been coming to for a long time. I should have done it sooner after Dad died. If I hold out much longer, I won't have anything to sell.
Dusty put in his 2 cents. I was hoping you'd let me try my hand.
No, Katie shuddered. It would mean killing.
I reckon it would.
No one man can possibly do anything, she went on as though arguing with herself. I've seen half a dozen XL men from here for days at a time, and the rustling went right on.
Could be they weren't trying very hard. Dusty had his cigarette rolled and he put fire to it.
What do you mean by that?
Katie's face had gone a little white. I wouldn't trust Boxley no further than I could throw a bull by the tail, Miss Katie. Can't you see that maybe he don't want the rustling to stop?
That's a terrible thing to say. You hardly know Lon at all.
Oh, I know him plenty good enough, Dusty reminded her. Any man that brags about his slick draw then shoots when a man ain't looking is liable to do anything. Katie compressed her lips.
You struck him without warning.
I was standing in front of him, and I took off my coat. It wasn't my fault if he didn't know what was coming.
This argument is useless.
Katie's voice trembled a little.
I'm going to be giving you Dad's old saddle and a horse. I want you to ride off to Katie this afternoon.
You sure you want me to do that? Dusty asked softly.
Yes, before something happens. I'm afraid Lon will come and catch you here.
I can take care of Lon.
No.
Katie rose swiftly and turned to the windows, staring out.
I won't have any killing. Not on the KT. I'll sell out first.
To Boxley? She whirled at him angrily.
Perhaps if you'll pay my price, or I might marry him and keep the KT.
Dusty laughed mirthlessly. That would fix everything, just the way Lon Boxley wants it. Katie turned back to the window. He saw her slender body stiffen.
I think that's Lon coming now.
Dusty got up to look over her shoulder. A lone horse was galloping towards the ranch.
It is Lon,
in a choked voice she said. Dusty was looking down at the curling hair on the back of her neck. He was standing quite close behind her. Well, this is a good time for a showdown.
No.
Katie's body brushed against him as she turned. He did not move, but looked down at her gravely. The bosom of her woolen shirt lifted and fell with her rapid breathing. Her eyes were dilated.
He mustn't know you're here, she cried. You'll have to hide. I'll talk to him.
No, said Dusty. I ain't in the habit of hiding, Katie. With a start, he realized that he'd called her by her first name. Just plain straight out with any miss in front at all. But she didn't seem to notice, or she didn't mind.
I can't let you meet him,
she cried out. They could hear the hoofbeats of Lon's horse now. It's bound to come, Dusty told her. Sooner or later, I'm staying here in the Big Bend.
Please, Katie implored him. Stay right here. Let me handle him.
She started to go past Dusty. He put out his arm to stop her. Are you afraid I'll kill him? Is that it, Katie?
Afraid for him?
She laughed shakily. Lon's horse was slowing as he neared the house.
He's killed every man that's ever went up against him. Can't you understand that?
Are you afraid of what'll happen to me? His voice was deep and purposeful. He still barred her way out of the room.
I don't want any man killed, not on my ranch.
She avoided his eyes. That's not no good reason for me to be hiding here. He turned and started away.
Wait,
Katie cried out. He turned and surprised to seeing tears in her eyes. She brushed them away with the back of her hand.
Isn't it enough that I'm begging you to not go out there and face him?
Dusty said, I reckon it is. His voice was humble. He dropped into one of the chairs at the table. I won't be any more bother to you. There was a loud knocking on the front door. They could hear Warner waddling down the hall to answer it.
Stay right here and be quiet.
Katie sped out of the room, closing the door softly behind her. Dusty got out his cigarette papers, carefully creased one. He poured tobacco into the crease, and his fingers tore the paper as he tried to roll it. He could hear the faint sounds of voices in the front of the house. He tried hard not to listen. He went to work on another cigarette paper and tore that one also, and then he gave up. He could still hear the voices out front. He broke a biscuit and buttered it. He forced himself to eat slowly, wiping out the last traces of honey on his plate. He wouldn't let himself think about Lon Boxley. He had promised Katie that he would remain quiet and let her handle the man. The sound of the voices stopped for a second. He waited to hear the hoofbeats of Boxley's horse going away, but there was only silence. He rolled a cigarette without mutilating the paper and then lit it up. He smoked it very slowly, savoring the smoke and making the cigarette last. Waiting became intolerable. But he had promised Katie. He strained his ears for any indication of what was taking place beyond the closed door, but could not hear a sound. He smoked the cigarette down to a tiny nubbin that burned his fingertips, and then dropped it in his coffee cup. He hadn't heard Boxley ride away, and certainly Katie would come and tell him as soon as the man left. No, the neighboring rancher must still be here at the KT. He cursed himself for having promised her, and then grew angry at Katie for making him promise. What had her last remark meant? When she asked him if it wasn't enough that she was begging him not to go out. At that moment, he had a thought. Hell, he didn't know what he had thought. The sight of tears in her eyes had unnerved him temporarily. He rolled another cigarette. He smoked this one swiftly, taking long, nervous drags on it and pulling the smoke deep into his lungs. He knew he couldn't sit still much longer. No man could. Not without knowing what was going on. He jerked around and came half out of the chair when he heard the door open. He saw the fat body of Juana instead of the girl he was expecting to see. The Mexican woman was beaming placidly. She came up to the table and started to stack up the dishes. Dusty asked her, "Where's Miss Katie and her company?" Juana looked at him in surprise and rounded her eyes.
She go with Senor Boxley, she no tell you?
No, Dusty said. His voice sounded far away in his own ears. There was a queer drumming in his head, and he pushed his chair back carefully and got up. "Thanks for a good dinner," he said to her, and then stalked out. He went around to the front of the house and saw that Boxley's horse was gone. There was no indication of life outside the ranch or the outbuildings. He walked stiffly towards the barn. The only way was not to do any thinking. Just keep your mind a blank, you damn fool. A man didn't have to think if he was willing to let his mind go blank. He'd be all right as long as he didn't think. As he neared the barn, Miguel came out to meet him, leading a saddled black horse. The old Mexican looked troubled. His voice was deep with sadness as he explained.
She tell me to say Barroco is yonder, senor.
He gestured vaguely to the Rio Grande. You saddle a horse for her too, I suppose?
Si, senor. She's riding with Senor Boxley.
Miguel turned his head to spit on the ground. He extended the bridle reins to Dusty. Dusty took the reins and threw one over the black's neck. He tested the stirrups and found them about the right height and swung into the saddle. He nodded goodbye to Miguel and reined the black around in the indicated direction of Brockno, the cesspool of the Big Bend, a gathering place of fugitives and outlaws of all races. He put the black to a lope and rode away from the KT ranch without looking back. End of chapter 9.